Hey everybody, welcome back to the Live Ultralight podcast powered by Outdoor Vitals. Today we have a very special guest all the way from Finland. Teemu Hartikainen, which Brigham gladly pointed out was probably an easier Finnish name to pronounce, was our guest speaker on today. He is a thru hiker and Nordic skier, gear designer and wilderness guide. He's covered around 7,500 miles across various trails from Finland's UKK-Trail to the Pacific Crest Trail. In this episode, Brigham actually, I think you were the first person to talk to him at PCT Trail Days, but he was actively on his PCT adventure when we met into Teemu, and Brigham became very fascinated with his backstory of doing these Nordic winter ski trips, dialing in gear for that. All the way down to calculating things like fuel consumption, and it gets very granular, and the details really start to matter when you're putting yourself into these very unforgivable situations. So, Brigham, you first kind of came on the radar with him and found this fascination with Teemu. So, from the conversation we just had with him, what are some of the highlights that you see listeners wanting to hear?
Yeah, I mean, first is like kind of the overall just breadth of his experience doing these, I'd say, more unique trips or adventures where they're really expedition style. You know, they're over 2 months long, and they're in wintertime, in Scandinavia into the Arctic Circle. So just the uniqueness of the conditions, and I think it was really fun hearing his lessons learned from one attempt from a trip, and then going to the same trip the next year, and making some substantial changes and seeing how that played out for him and improving his efficiency. And then, just again, the context of, he's done, the PCT, I don't know, 1.5 times, or whatever. And then how different that world is compared to these long distance ski throughs, or I don't know, through skis. I don't know I think that's what you might call it, but it was really fun, kind of going through all the finite details of the decision making process even. Yeah,
so we'll go ahead and roll this interview, but I think you guys are really going to enjoy the details that we talk through. I think there's a lot of lessons to be learned. I think it's also interesting just to hear, why he does these specific type of adventures, what he's getting out of them. But I think you will all have something to learn from Teemu, and I'm definitely excited for him. And then we'll talk a little bit about what he's up to in about a month from right now. He'll be starting a new adventure, and we talk about that. So we'll go ahead and roll this podcast. I think you guys will really enjoy it, and we'll see you guys on the other side. All right, Teemu, we're super excited to have you on the show today. We first met you at PCT Trail Days, and I know that you stole Brigham away from our booth for a little bit of just berating him with a lot of amazing adventures that you've been on. But maybe let's back up and just hear for a second about how the remainder of your hike went on the PCT, and then we'd love to jump into all of these other adventures that you've done in the past.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here to speak with you guys. So PCT from the trail days on, it was a bit smoky in the beginning going through to Washington. We kind of rushed it with my partner Vilma, and we ended up doing our longest days in Washington, which wasn't so good. I mean, it was so pretty, but we needed to kind of get to the border within our limits with the permit that we had. And when we got there, we did our flip back to, it was Bernie, where we flipped from Lone Pine originally because of snow and some injuries. And then we actually got permits to hike south from Bernie. So it was really exciting to be able to continue on the trail and also get the Sobo experience, because we had been on the trail since March 8th. So we had a long hike.
Wow, yeah.
And this is your second time coming back to the PCT, right?
Yeah.
You had attempted it in 2019, and then this was kind of the come back and refinish.
Yeah, it feels amazing to finally kind of be done with the trail. Started 2019, 4 years ago, and didn't end up making it the whole way because we had another heavy snow year in 2019, and I had some time limits. So after the Sierra, there was some more snow to cover, and it was too post-holy to keep going and make it to my deadline. So ended up waiting a few years and now finally able to do it. It wasn't easy this time either, even more snow. So
it seems ironic that snow would be a problem for you, where you spend so much of your time in the snow.
Yeah, I mean, the snow that we have in Finland, it's completely different than what's on the PCT. So we don't have those mountains.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, it was really fun to connect at the Trail Days event. And I mean, the timing's perfect because, again, you're coming back the second time. And also just, speaking to you about just the PCT and then some of the other things you had been doing and some of the things you've been planning. I was just thinking how much more logistically challenging it is to do a thru hike or attempt a thru hike and then have to come back and attempt it again, just so the audience knows you live in Finland, which is no close distance from the west coast of the United States. So, I mean, congratulations on even being able to make the arrangements. And I totally understand how the time constraints would be just a bit of a less common concern that most PCT hikers have in just attempting or finishing that trail.
Thank you. Yeah, exactly. It was hard with the logistics because coming from abroad, you don't really have the same kind of support system. If something breaks down or you need to send somebody some packages to hold some gear, because we spent a long time on the trail. We changed gear for many times. And luckily we had a friend hike the trail last year, and she connected us with someone in San Diego, and then they ended up helping us throughout the trail. And to be honest, we could not have done it without. So it would have been just too much hassle with all of this gear changes and stuff. So that helped a lot.
Yeah, I mean, if you're starting in March and you're finishing into the fall, you're going through a lot of different types of gear, right? You're switching gear a lot and having to adapt to completely different seasons and then obviously different climates, going from the southern part of the United States to the northern part of the United States.
Yeah, basically when we started in Campo, the second day we got snow on the trail. So basically we started with warm gear, and then we just hiked on and found out that, okay, it's going to be a really cold time in the SoCal section. And we also had a ton of rain. And we had also planned to go through the Sierra early in the season to kind of be better with all of the snow conditions and weather. But that kind of backfired when I had my first injury on the second week on the trail. So I had tendinitis on my ankle, and we needed to wait around 3 weeks for that to heal. So that already pushed us back a lot. And
what do you think?
Then
what do you think
to,
caused that?
Yeah.
What do you think caused that, or were you doing any pre-training, or was there a fall or something, or?
There's many contributing factors that I've tried to work out why that was. And I mean, I did some training beforehand, but it was cross-country skiing, so it was not like walking with the backpack on. Coming from that to like hiking, it's a bit different than hiking all of that elevation gain. And also I had a backpack because I wanted to bring a larger pack to fit all of the snow gear and everything, warmer gear. And I ended up going with a backpack that I had some minor issues with the fit prior to the trail. But I thought that, okay, I haven't just got used to the back yet. So I brought that and ended up kind of tilting my pelvis in a position that's maybe not the best for me, and maybe it affected my stride, but you cannot know about those things.
Yeah, it's I think to give like the audience a little bit of context, I really appreciate that you brought up, going from a lot of time on skis versus hiking on, just walking on the ground. I think we'll get into that, but I just for context on your background, I think it's good for the audience to kind of know a little bit about, kind of what you have been up to like the last 5 years. If you look at kind of some of the things you've been up to, you've been spending a lot of time, let's say, away from home, or not necessarily sleeping in your own bed, kind of out in the wild consistently for years now. And I think that's pretty, it's really interesting. And to, in that context of you, going to the PCT and having an injury or, some issues like that. Just the differences between the terrain that you spend a lot of time in versus going to someplace new. I think sometimes you can only do so much, and some things are just going to happen.
Yeah, so maybe give us kind of a background on what you've been up to the last handful of years and what you're typically doing, and just so that we can get some context for actually how maybe the PCT is not as normal of a hike compared to some of these other things from what I'm looking at least down this list, right? So yeah, give us a background on what you typically are up to over in Finland and Scandinavia.
Right. So hiking in Finland is a lot different than hiking in the US on these long trails. I started doing long hikes 5 years ago in 2018. I was kind of in a situation with my life that I wanted to do something different, and I needed time to think about it. And then I kind of started to do some digging with all of this backpacking gear. What can I do differently? And I found this old lost trail that was about 600 miles long, but it had never been maintained completely. So that kind of sparked my, how would you say it? I just got into this kind of adventurous mode that I wanted to go and try if I could find the trail and if I could just walk along it, because I've always been in the woods. I've been in the scouts since I was 7 and done a lot of orienteering and different kinds of activities in the woods. So it was kind of natural to seek that space in the nature, and got to do that hike. And then along that hike, I met my partner, and she actually introduced me to the PCT. She had read the book Wild, and she told me about this hike and she wanted to do it. And then I kind of stole the idea from her, and I hiked the rest of the trail and finished it, and was already planning to fly over and try and hike the PCT the next year. So I tried that. It didn't work out. But then I flew back to Finland and thought about, okay, I have a whole lot of time to spend my summer, so why don't I go and hike another thing? So I looked around and found that there is like an 800-mile trail in Sweden that is also, in a sense, more of a choose your own adventure type of hike, that there are trails throughout the whole hike, but you can choose your own way. You can like change paths. So I went and hiked that the same year that I first tried the PCT.
This Finland and this Swedish hike, are they in the summertime? Like, are you going in the snow, or are you not?
You can do both. So most people hike in the summertime, but about 1/3 of people who hike also hike or ski in the wintertime. So you have a lot of different options, and you can also like ride your bike on some of the trails, and there's a lot of different activities you can do.
And you kind of alluded to this earlier, at least with the Finland one, is a lot of the trail a lot more flat than say hiking out west in the United States?
Yes, in general, it's really flat compared to any of the trails that you have. So
okay.
It's forested. There's a lot of lakes. So there's a lot of water supply everywhere. You don't need to stress out about that. And pretty much all of the water you can just drink.
Okay.
You don't need to filter sometimes.
Okay. So in 2019, you attempt the Pacific Crest Trail, and then you also go and do this hike in Sweden. And then how about after that?
So after the hike in Sweden, I got to thinking that, okay, I've done some shorter hikes in Finland during the time, just getting into other things. And I did think about doing the same trail that I did in Sweden, to do it in the winter time as well, because there's two options. So me and my partner, we first tried the trail in, I think it was 2021, and I actually got injured along that hike as well again, and I quit and she finished, and the next year I went ahead and tried again, changed my tactic with the gear and stuff, and then did it the next year, and that's where we are.
So that was 800 miles in the winter?
Yes, 800 miles in the winter through the open mountains in Sweden.
So was it farther north then?
So it kind of starts quite south, like middle of Sweden, and then you ski or hike all the way to the northernmost point of Sweden. So it's like there's a triple country border point.
Yeah.
That there's Norway, there's Finland, and Sweden that connects.
Yeah, that's it's fascinating to me, because if you think about, I mean, I'd love to hear your just kind of breakdown of a lot of different aspects of that. You know, how were you traveling? Was it all on skis the whole time? Were there other modes of transportation that you were using? You know, were you staying in? Was it a combination of huts and your own sleep system, or was it 100% self-sustained with your own shelter? It's fascinating to because you're talking about the winter time, basically in the Arctic Circle, and being pretty self-sustaining for. 800 miles. I can't imagine that would be less than a couple months, but please elaborate, on your system. You mentioned you learned some things the year prior with gear and your tactics. So I think that's really fascinating. I know when I spoke to you in Oregon, that caught my attention. When you mentioned what you're going to be doing this upcoming year, and your previous experience with, covering that many miles in the middle of winter in what I would say is a very inhospitable conditions. So, please elaborate on that.
Yeah, so maybe I could start with what people usually do and what we did when we tried the trail the first time, or my first attempt. So basically what people usually do is they have their Nordic backcountry touring skis. They're long and skinny with metal edges, and then you have a leather boot with that. So you kind of just hike in snow on skis. That's basically it. And you do that by pulling a pulk or a sled behind you. So you don't need to carry all of the weight, because winter gear typically is more heavy than your typical through hiking kit. So we started with pulks weighing in about 35 kilograms. That's something like 65 pounds.
Yeah.
70. Yeah, around that. And we had actually done a lot of modifications to our gear, and we had made some of the bags that we used in those pulks ourselves, and we had some gear that we made. And
so, quick question on part of that. That's a lot of weight compared to what people are typically backpacking with. Where does the weight come from? Were you having really long fueling, like between resupplies? Is it really far distance? Was there a lot of food in there, or is it just a lot of intense winter gear?
So both gear and food. We started with 9 days of food, I think, because we wanted to have some time to figure our routines out, because it was like our first very long winter trip. So we wanted to have that flexibility with the food. So we had like 20 pounds of food each. Then you have fuel for the multi-fuel stove, because those are more reliable in the wintertime in very low temperatures. So you have some of that in the weight. But winter gear, typically what you would use is a tunnel tent, which can weigh a lot. And then you need to have warm sleeping bags. What we typically use is we use a down bag and then a lightweight synthetic on top of it to kind of capture some of the condensation that you sweat during the night, so it doesn't get flat as quickly as it would without. So that brings some weight. And then clothing is probably one of the biggest ones, because you need to have so many layers, and it can get really cold. We didn't have temperatures lower than minus 20, I think.
Minus 20
sure.
Fahrenheit?
I'm not sure about the Fahrenheit. It's minus 20 Celsius. I should have looked it up.
That's probably like in the negative 10 to negative 15-ish.
Somewhere around that.
Okay. So this is like a more traditional setup for your first attempt, right? You've got a 70-pound sled. You're pulling it on Nordic skis. You're carrying 9 days worth of food at a time, and then just lots of layers, and some heavier pieces like tents and whatnot. How did that go for you then?
So it went pretty well. We did something that people in Sweden typically don't do. With their sleds, they usually have these bars that connect to the sled to keep it in place. But we did it in the style that they do on polar expeditions, with just pulling the pulks with cord, like a string, a rope. And it kind of made the skiing in some sense easier, because it wasn't like pushing you around when you went downhill. You can like steer it very well, but it kind of gave us this trouble that it would like get stuck behind some trees and stuff, and sometimes I just lost control completely. So it gave us some trouble, but it was okay. And then in other ways, like our gear worked as we intended it to work. But the thing is, we prepared for minus 40 degree weather, because that's what can happen. It's not often that it does, but if you get caught in a cold snap, you want to be safe with that, because most of the time you are skiing in areas where the weather can change rapidly and you can lose vision through whiteout. And in those conditions, sometimes the terrain is so that you cannot safely ski on because you might fall off a cliff or something like that. So you would just want to set up camp and wait it out.
Is wind a pretty big factor? Is there a lot of wind up there day in and day out?
Yeah, there can be. We didn't have that much wind in the beginning, but later in the hike, my partner, she got caught in one of those storms. It was, I think, 70 miles an hour winds. So,
wow.
And
that's
it was
probably
dark.
where, yeah, that's probably where things like that, those tunnel tents, are going to shine a little bit, right?
Yeah. You just want
they're
to
like for worst case scenario.
Exactly.
So I'd say at this point you have quite a bit of experience, but if somebody, how long does it take, would you say, for maybe somebody that is kind of doing this for the first time, to learn? How long does it take to learn that lesson of the situation you described when the wind picks up and it's a whiteout situation? That lesson of, as soon as these conditions exist, you just stop where you are and set up camp. Because I think a lot of people in our probably side of the world where you maybe have a goal for the day and some bad weather comes in, and there's a natural tendency to just push through. Even like for the very experienced backpacker, it's like, hey, well, let's just push through the rain or the snow or the storm just because. But there's definitely way less room for error in that scenario. So I think it's interesting to think about, how long it takes somebody to learn that lesson and kind of already have that confirmed in their minds that as soon as this whiteout situation starts, then you automatically just stop and set up camp.
I think it takes a while, and it's not many people that learn it until it's too late. They learn it the hard way. So I'm of the kind that I researched my conditions where I'm going, the area, I do my research on that, and I don't want to push the limits in those situations any further than I have to. So if there is a very good reason to keep going, you're out of food or something like that, yes, I would do it, but most cases you don't have to. If you continue in those conditions where you cannot see and wind is blowing you around and snow is accumulating, it's going to be very slow to get from A to B. It's going to be very slow. It makes more sense to just stop, wait it out a day or two, doesn't matter. You can ski faster when the weather settles down. So I don't know. It's we kind of, in the Finnish context, people tend to look up to polar explorers and what they do. And because they kind of have the time limit that they only have a set amount of food and they cannot go any further if they fall behind their schedule, they have to do it. Mm-hmm. And the terrain is more flat, so you can do it. So people look up to that, and I think that's where the idea pretty much comes from that. Okay, you have this handheld GPS device, and then you just follow that blindly, and then you end up breaking your ski or leg.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of curious to how long it takes you to set up your winter setup. Like if you did have a storm like this roll in, and you need to set up your shelter and your gear. Is it a lot more difficult for you to set up that particular shelter? Is there adaptations you're doing to that shelter with different types of stakes? Just some things like that.
Yeah, it's actually pretty funny because you would think that large and strong winter tent, it would take more time or it would be harder to set it up. But in reality, there are some tricks that you can do to make it faster than your typical any season tent. What you do is you have the tent kind of almost ready to pitch at all times. You roll it up, you take the tent poles out of the channels like halfway through, and then you have like tape them together. So there's only one joint where you just pull them apart, and then you kind of fold it only once, and then you roll it all in, and you just keep that on top of your sled. So when you need to set it up, you just pull out your stake bag, you take the stakes out. They have some carabiner clips that you can easily just clip onto your tent, and you basically just have like 3 stakes in the end that is facing the wind, and then you just kind of roll the tent open and connect the tent poles one by one. There's typically 3 or 4 of them. So you can do that in 3 to 5 minutes if you train for it. And with 2 people, it's going to be even faster.
And with anchoring your tent, there's, I think I'd say non-Arctic parts of the world, it's very common for people to take, snow stakes and maybe that's adequate and maybe it's not. What was your anchoring system for setting up those tents in a short amount of time?
So I do use snow stakes, especially on those flat open areas where the snow is wind packed. So you can kind of push them in pretty easily. But what I do is typically those snow stakes have holes in them throughout the whole length. So you just take the middle hole and you connect the guy line to that middle hole, and then you make a dead man anchor out of that in the snow. So you just sink it in and pile some snow on top of it so it holds it sideways. And that's what I use. But I know that if the snow is like really powdery, it isn't compacted in those more forested areas that we have a lot of. People can also make some of those, they kind of make a fabric bag, and then you just clip a carabiner to a handle of that, and then you just have that as your dead man.
You just bury a bag.
Yeah, basically.
Interesting. Yeah.
People also use plastic bags sometimes.
Yeah.
They're not as full of snow, or what are they filling it with?
Yeah. You just fill it with snow, and then you just bury it in the snow. It holds pretty well.
That's
the more surface area you have, the better.
Yeah, that's super interesting. I mean, because the snow stakes, they weigh a lot compared to any normal backpacking stake. And so a bag, like if you could use like a lighter weight fabric in a bag, that's going to weigh less than a snow stake.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Typical, like, I don't know, typical snow stake, it weighs like 2 to 3 ounces. But then there are those short MSR Blizzard ones that only weigh an ounce each, and you need, depending on the tent, you might need like 8 to 12 of them, depends.
Yeah.
And it's still a bit more weight, but you can get by pretty light. But those are at the very minimum that you want to have. It takes a bit more effort.
Yeah. So this particular hike, you end up not finishing it. Your partner finishes, but you come back to do this hike again, correct? So maybe walk us through changes that you made, lessons that you learned in gear, and then how you're approaching this hike for the second attempt.
Yeah. So the first attempt for my partner, it took 70 days to complete it. And it was mainly due to weather. But because of the weather, we sometimes did not have snow to walk on. It was like we had a month of rain in the winter, which was weird.
Yeah.
So sometimes it was just bare ground and you just walked along roads because you couldn't really ski in the terrain. So,
but you've got a sled. So what are you doing with the sled at that point? You just dragging it in the dirt?
Well, you just drag it in the dirt. That's actually we did install some runners on the base of our hooks, and that helped a ton. They only have like a few scratches in the bottom, so you can just drag it along the road. But what I was getting at was that taught me kind of a lesson that, okay, this kind of conditions can also happen, that you cannot really drag the sled really well. And then when you go do your resupply, it's kind of a pain in the butt to just drag it along and try to find a place where to leave it, because some of those towns are like cities. You cannot leave it everywhere. And then transportation wise, when you go to your starting location, we were almost banned from a train because we had skis and sleds and all kinds of bags with us. So it was a lot of hassle with that. So I ended up doing a switch over to a backpack instead. And because the traditional winter gear does not fit in the backpack, or it would weigh too much, I kind of needed to do a complete rework of what I was bringing as gear in the winter time. So I was familiar with the clothing systems. I had a pretty lightweight clothing system already, but I left something out and swapped something for different pieces to kind of try things out. And then also I switched from the tunnel tent to a pyramid style tent, which does pretty well in the wind as well, but is very lightweight. And what else? Clothing.
You're not using like a
system.
hot tent. You're not using like a hot tent setup or anything, right? You're just using
just the canopy.
Pyramid. Are you using like a floor or an inner in it, or just more of the canopy?
So the pyramid tent, I don't use a hot tent. It's a bit too much hassle with the firewood, and on the open areas you cannot really find any. So it's not really efficient where we do these kinds of trips. But what we do with the tunnel tent, any tent, with the multi-fuel stove, you need to be really careful when you bring it in the tent, because you can have carbon monoxide build up, and you can have like a large flame if some gasoline leaks. So you need to be really careful with that. But what we do is you bring it inside the tent, and it will actually heat the tent up so much so that even if it's like minus 30 outside, you can just hang out with a t-shirt on. So it stays warm due to the multi-fuel stove. So it also has that purpose, that I can dry some of my gear. And to make that process more efficient, I had a solid wall inner tent, like a half inner for the pyramid tent. So it kind of retains the heat better. And also because you will have a lot of spin drift snow, like getting into the tent, even if you pile some snow around the skirt of the outer tent, but you will always have it. So it's good to have that solid inner. But the thing is that those haven't been on the market, so it's hard to find them. You need to make some gear by yourself or find something that almost works.
So you had to kind of make a custom inner tent for the pyramid that you had?
Yeah, I ended up finding a fitting inner tent for the shelter I had. I had the MLD Duamid XL, and I found an inner that was almost compatible with it, but I just added some adjustments to it so I can tighten it better, and I have more room in the tent. Yeah,
I remember when we spoke in Oregon, you explained that to me, and I was really impressed with that technique that you used. I mean, and maybe you can elaborate a little bit, but that seemed like a really important part of your logistical system and maintaining your efficiency to accomplish that trail in the amount of time that you had safely. So, I mean, maybe just explain how you used that to your advantage, not just to be warm, but to probably dry out gear and be able to keep on your schedule.
So when my gear got more lightweight, I could ski faster, and because I didn't have the sled dragging behind me, I could also ski faster. So my speed sometimes doubled compared to before. So that was a huge factor. And you also do have some like wilderness huts in Sweden, and you have some wind shelters that you can use to your advantage when if the weather is bad, you can also sleep in those. So you have some margin of error. So I hadn't used the pyramid tent before in any strong storms, but I asked around and did my research, and I found out that, okay, this should work well enough. And on my second attempt, I did run into some situations where it was really beneficial to have that strong system as a tent. I did have some strong storms, and it stood well. So that's good. And my second attempt was a lot more quicker. So I skied it's called Vita Bandet, or white ribbon in English. I skied the second attempt in 52 days compared to the 70 days before. So it does have a huge effect on.
Yeah, just cutting down the weight and then having more mobility without the sled. That's pretty remarkable. What if you break that down? You know, what was on a slow day? What was your average slow day mileage versus your average efficient day mileage?
So there are some things that you need to factor in when talking about like average day distance traveled, and this because when you start in typically February, I started in the middle of February. So when you start early, the days are short and they are colder than later on. And on this trail, I was going to ask
you how short. Yeah, I was going to ask you, like, how much time do you really have that far north in the winter months?
Well, it depends as you go on, but I think it was like from, I would want to say 8 a.m. to like 4 p.m. at the beginning. So it's not very short because it starts quite down south. So it's not as short as it could be, but still it's kind of that you need to be efficient during the day if you want to.
That still makes a lot of time in a tent on back-to-back days, right? Because like we'll go out winter camping and you spend one night in there at like you got like 14 hours or something. It feels like in your tent. It's like that seems like a long time, but that's one night. That's not like over and over and over again. So Yeah, I'd love to hear about that, but continue on, I guess, with the original question. But it's just something to note. It's a totally different situation than most people are used to backpacking in, right? So,
yeah. You have some duties and chores to do at camp. It will take hours of work to melt the snow and have the water supply for the evening and the next day, and then you do it in the morning to fill up the reserves as well, and it takes a lot of time. So it's
I wanted
always
to get
slower.
I wanted to get into that with when I mentioned earlier your tent and stove system is almost one of the most important systems that you have when you talk about logistically accomplishing your trip. It doesn't just keep you warm. It doesn't just heat up the water for your food, but you've got a clothing system and a sleep system that are constantly accumulating moisture, and you also have to drink water to function physically as a human being. So maybe elaborate on that. How are you dealing with, how are you calculating how much fuel? I mean, even just knowing how much fuel to pack to heat your food, that alone is an important thing. But now you have to know how much fuel to pack to, drink water as well as dry your clothes out. So maybe you could kind of talk about those things: hydration, food consumption, and moisture management.
Oh gosh, I always have the same mistake. I do not jot down how much fuel I spend. So every time it gets to the winter season, I need to kind of find out how much I use each time again. I have a bad habit of that. So I don't know. It's like one of those mid-size bottles. I think I use about 4 to 5 days by myself. So I use a tiny bit of fuel compared to what most people use. So it's going to be for a week, maybe a pound of fuel, I think.
So for a week.
So, yeah.
Yeah. How are you melting snow? You know what I mean? With that amount of fuel, like, to me, it seems like fuel is kind of the lifeblood here. Like, you're going to be burning a lot of it to both melt snow, to dry clothes, to, cook food. So how are you melting? Are you melting snow for water? I mean, is that your water source, or?
Yeah.
How you managing that?
Yeah. Most of the time it's coming from the snow. So you just end up sitting there and adding some snow on your pot, and then you kind of stir it around to make the process faster. And you just keep doing that. Most of the time it's that, but yeah, you have the stove on, and then you always need to have some water left at the end of the day to pour it on the bottom of the pot, because if you don't have that, you can burn through the pot if you just add snow. So you first need to have that seed water in the pot, and then you just slowly keep adding that snow into the mix.
That could be a very slow process, though, right? Yeah. I mean, when I've done that, it can take me, sometimes I've done it for, I feel like, hours. But you're not running your stove for hours. I mean, right?
It takes about an hour and a half to do all of the duties in the evening for me. So most people boil it also, just to get rid of any bacteria or whatever might be in the snow, but I don't. So I just melt it and leave it at that to make it more efficient fuel-wise. So it takes some time. Then this is one of the best tricks that I learned. I don't know where I learned it from, but you kind of punch a hole underneath your sleeping pad to the snow, and then you place your water bottles in there, and it stays liquid overnight. So
yeah, that
also saves some.
I learned that from my dad when I was in Scouts, probably 10 or 11 years old. We would do winter camping trips, and we would always take a big container of water, probably 2 gallons maybe, and we would haul it in with sleds, and he would always boil the water right up until the second we left the house, and then he would pour it in a jug, knowing that when we got to camp, all we had to do was bury it about, a foot or two under the snow, and that water would remain liquid for, hours, probably more than 24 hours in there. And I've always been fascinated with that. And so that's a familiar, technique that you mentioned. So yeah, it's a good one.
So you're running, so just so that I get this straight, you are running your stove for almost an hour every day.
Yeah.
Okay.
Basically. And you also can use the same heat. It's not going to be as warm if you have the pot on top of the stove, but you can also hang your sleeping bag on your shoulders and kind of lean more towards the heat, so you can use that
contain the
heat as well.
Bit.
Yeah, so you can just dry most of the gear that way. And some socks and gloves that I just use my body heat to dry them during the night or during the day when I'm skiing and swapping out socks and gloves. It's using everything that you can. If you have running water available in a stream somewhere, you just go and collect that instead of melting the snow anytime you get the chance to do it safely. And sometimes on those wind shelters or huts, you can also use a wood stove to melt the water. So you can save quite a lot of fuel by using everything that you have around you.
Yeah, I mean, it just sounds like efficiency is the name of the game, and you can only gain these efficiencies by refining as you go. I would imagine you were way more efficient 30 days into the journey than you were after 5 days. And 5 days, that's a pretty substantial amount of time for most people that would do a backpacking trip in these conditions. If you think about most mountaineering attempts, that's commonplace for them to hydrate by melting snow. But most summits are, a 2 or 3 day climb at best. And so, the importance of being efficient with fuel is important for them, but I think it's an entirely new level when you're doing it for days and days and days on end in those conditions. It's fascinating. And then I think for people like us that, maybe are going to do 1 or 2 nights in the winter or not even winter camping, but when you mention putting the sleeping bag over your shoulders and, your mitts or your gloves against your body and using the sleeping bag to contain the heat of the stove, but also dry off and get rid of some of the moisture that accumulates, that's like a level of intricacy that most people on a normal backpacking trip are just, it's not going to be worth it. Because you don't have to carry that much fuel. You're going to be done in 3 days. So why bother with the finite little details of draping a sleeping bag over my shoulder while I'm by a heat source melting water to drink. So, it's super fascinating. You mentioned something to me, at trail days that you kind of figured out in order to consistently keep your clothes functioning properly and drying out, you were turning on your stove, or you were doing something where every few days you would turn on your stove and you would heat the tent up for a certain amount of time. Could you go into that a little bit?
Yeah, so basically on top of the everyday duties with the snow melting. I would also run the stove once a week usually, just for maybe 30 minutes to heat the tent up even more and then get rid of the accumulated moisture in the sleeping bag, most importantly. Most of the other clothing is going to be dry most of the time, or if your outer jacket is not dry, it doesn't matter because it's going to freeze and then it thaws when you put it on in the morning, and then you just ski and it gets dry as you go. So like I've been putting a lot of thought into my clothing system, choosing the materials that do not soak in too much water or moisture. They don't retain it, they just let it through. So there's a lot of mesh kind of layers nowadays to allow for that.
Mm-hmm. Do you use, I know there's a Scandinavian company over there that has like nets. They use kind of netting for a base layer, or have you ever tried those?
Yeah, Brigham actually, he recommended the Brunje base layers to me. But then that kind of sparked me a memory that, hey, we have something like this in Finland as well. There's Svala, who makes the same kind of polypropylene mesh base layers that are really light, and they just, if you wash them and you they dry pretty much instantly when you just drain them. And we have those as well. So I'm using them nowadays. It's going to be for my next trip when I have that base layer. I've been like running with it on like for the past 2 months now, just testing it out.
Testing it, cool.
Yeah. So I want to go back to kind of drying out gear and your sleeping bag, because it's a really interesting thing, right? Because one of the best ways to dry something out, or I don't know if it's the best way, but one way to dry things out is to actually sleep with damp gear, right? But there's pros and cons of that, right? Sometimes sleeping with damp gear can take away too much heat from you, introduce moisture into your sleeping bag, and sometimes that isn't a factor, but sometimes it is. And where you're doing back-to-back days like this, what do you have to share, or what have you learned about, drying out some of these layers? I imagine you're probably trying to dry out socks every day, base layers every day, maybe a pair of gloves every day or something like that. So, how would you attempt this? Would you sleep with your gear, or is that kind of something you decided was just not worth it? Yeah, I'd love to just hear about your drying techniques of some of these pieces.
Okay, so basically, if you did everything as efficiently as you could, you wouldn't need to worry about your sleeping bag getting wet. You would be using a vapor barrier layer inside the sleeping bag, where it's basically a trash bag that collects all the moisture in that you sweat overnight. I don't use that because I'm too much of a comfort guy. I might get into it later on, but waking up damp, I don't like it. So I'd rather just dry my gear every once in a while. And about getting into the sleeping bag, I try to have dry clothes on. So when I'm getting to camp, I slow down so I don't sweat, and I give my body some time to heat up my layers. And if the humidity is not too high on the outside, you can kind of just slow down and let your body do the heating, and it dries your gear over, let's say, 20 to 30 minutes of the last miles that you're hiking. And then when you get to camp, you just also are going to spend with that pyramid tent. It's going to take about 10 minutes to set it up. You just spend some time doing that. It keeps you warm. So during all of that time, I typically have almost dry clothing on me, even if I sweat during the day. So that dries most of it up. It's going to be a bit of energy loss with that, but it's not significant. It's just better to not spend your fuel doing that. And then when I get to the sleeping stage, where I dry the socks that I still have kind of damp from the day, I just put them like on my layers, like between layers on my shoulders. So everything is kind of like around the neck or the head area where you will anyways be like breathing out, and it's going to be a bit damp,
to the
so it
open
doesn't
air.
matter. Yeah.
More
So that's
ventilation.
where like, yeah. So it doesn't like get pulled into the sleeping bag.
Yeah, that makes sense, because a lot of times when I've attempted this myself, I'm putting wet pieces of gear or damp pieces of gear down into my foot box, and it's just totally trapped in there, right? It's and so it can, I mean, eventually in a perfect world, that vapor can push through the layers and exit the sleeping bag, but I wouldn't say that it's a guarantee. Or I've had times when like maybe a sock or something like that kind of gets rolled into a ball and shoved into a corner and it just doesn't get dried out. Versus, like you say, laying it up here, you've got a lot of heat in your core, but also it's spread out, it's not crumpled in a ball. There's air movement every time you're rolling over and things like that. You're at least getting some air movement. So that makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, you mentioned vapor barriers, and that it's a proven technique, especially in polar regions and expedition type travel. It is a proven technique, but I appreciate you explaining your way of doing it, because that is also a proven methodology to accomplish the same thing, which is manage moisture so that you can continue on the journey, right? And so to me, like, I think, the biggest lesson is either technique requires like being consciously deliberate and intentional about such small details. Like Tayson mentioned, we can get away with most of the time having damp socks in the foot box because the next day they will have dried out mostly, but our conditions are not so critical, even if it's like 2 or 3 days. But that extra step of being deliberate and intentional about, with putting the damp pieces up against, the warmest part of your body where they have the room to evacuate the moisture that's drying off. I think either way, it's to maintain the efficiency that you need on this type of trip. It just requires that next level of detail and like discipline. Really, I mean, there's so much. It just sounds like there's just so much discipline required to just maintain.
Yeah, it takes a conscious effort to do it over time, over a long period of time, for sure. And one reason I haven't been getting into those things that putting something in your foot box of the sleeping bag is because I get cold feet every night. It's so cold down there that it would not dry. Even if I threw in a hot water bottle, it would not dry.
Really? Yeah. No, there's some people that they have bad circulation or whatever it is, but I know, you're not alone for sure.
Yeah. But the most important part, I think, to keep dry would be the boots. Like, if they get damp, like, there's no way for the moisture to escape during the day, even if they're like breathable membrane boots, ski boots. It stays wet. It will freeze, and it will freeze your toes. So that is actually where I use vapor barriers. So I just have the socks. I have a thin liner inside them, and then I just swap them out once a day.
Do you do the vapor barrier? Do you do your vapor barrier sock against your skin, or do you do it over the sock?
So I have a thin liner against the skin. Then I have the vapor barrier and then I have a thick wool sock over that, kind of just to keep it in place and give me some more insulation in the boot.
So the only thing you have to dry out is that really thin liner sock.
Yeah, and it can be managed with body heat.
Gotcha. Yeah, that sounds really smart, actually. Something that thin and light is going to dry out really quickly, but it probably keeps it much more comfortable inside that vapor barrier sock. So,
yeah,
it seems really smart. So, you go back, you do this hike the second time, you finish in 52 days. Seemed like you dialed in your systems a lot. Probably, I mean, just from the way you talk about it too, feels like you built a lot of confidence in these type of conditions. And now you've got your sights set on another even more lengthy trip, right? So maybe walk us through what you're about to attempt and if there's any changes to gear or how you're approaching your gear for such a crazy endeavor.
Yeah, so my next trip is going to be me heading to the southern tip of Norway and then attempting to ski through the whole country all the way north to the northernmost point. And that's going to take about 3 months, give or take a month or two, depending on weather, and about 1,700 miles.
On skis. And when are you doing this?
On skis. Sorry?
You're starting when?
Yeah, so there's a few factors in play that are changing currently, but I have a very similar kit as I had on my last Sweden trip. So I am preparing to start this in about middle of January, but it seems that there will be a short delay because my backpack maker is sick, so my pack isn't here yet. I need to still test run it, and yeah, so it's going to be kind of a late start, but I don't mind. I got room to play.
Yeah, so middle of winter skiing from the southernmost point of Norway to the northernmost point of Norway.
Yeah,
you met you on your Sweden trip. You know, you were twice as fast, basically, on your feet. You had dialed your weight down significantly. What do you expect, or what was your day-to-day pack weight on that last Sweden trip, and what do you expect that it's going to be on your Norway expedition?
Okay, so my pack weight for the Sweden ski tour was about, I think the base weight was around 19 pounds or something along those lines, 9.3 kilograms for the metrics out there. And I dropped it down by like, I think 2 pounds by the end of the hike because it gets warmer as spring approaches. So I'm planning to do the same this time, and my starting weight is going to be just about the same, 18, 19 pounds. But that is going to be me bringing along more electronics and some other gear that I'm testing out, and that's kind of going to add to the weight, but I'm going to be more efficient with carrying water, so that's kind of going to make the overall system more lightweight. And then one interesting factor in play as well is that with skiing equipment, weight is not always everything. So my skiing kit, I have tried to make it as light as possible, but with the skis I'm using, the design of the ski has more to do with the efficiency than a few ounces here and there. So yeah. I've also put some effort to finding out the best system for that.
So quick question on the pack. What kind of capacity of pack are you using? How big is the pack?
For the Sweden trip, it was 55 liters. And for this time, it's going to be 60 to 70 liters, somewhere around that.
And then for the skis, I mean, Norway, I don't know, I guess, I mean, I have never been there, but I'm picturing there are mountains and things like that. So are you ever using skins on your skis? Or what kind of skis are you moving into?
Yeah, sometimes, but if I use skins, they're going to be kind of like a half-length kicker skin underneath the foot. So many manufacturers of these kind of skis, they have this kind of connection that you can just like click it into place and then kind of have it just underneath the foot, so it doesn't drag you down so much that like a full-length skin would do. But I'm mostly going to be using waxable skis and then just using the skins when I need to. And I found it that those kicker skins are going to be sufficient for me to climb like straight up all kinds of angles that I need to. So it's not going to be like straight up, straight down, but it's going to do the job.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to be taking the most efficient route. You're not going on an alpine touring trip where you're trying to, run circuits in the morning and get up and get some downhill time. You're trying to cover distance, and so I imagine you're going to be focused on that versus finding a good run for a morning.
So are you sticking with the long Nordic skis still, like longer, skinnier skis?
Yeah, I actually went even skinnier from the skinny skis I had and even longer. So I went longer and skinnier and with more camber. I don't know how you pronounce it.
Camber, yeah.
It's a rare kind of word around here. So yeah, more camber and they're more stiff. So it's gonna get me to that better kick and glide experience.
So what are you looking at as far as like miles per day that you're estimating on average for this upcoming trip?
So in Sweden, I did just under 20 miles on average per day, I think. And in Norway, I'm imagining it might get a bit higher, but in the beginning, it's going to be slower, and later in the season, it's going to be faster. So it's hard to estimate, but I'm thinking it's going to be around the like typical day when I get into like the rhythm of everything. I think it's going to be like 25 miles per day. But I know I did some longer days in Sweden as well. So if I now have a more efficient kit and skis, I might be just doing more. It depends on weather and everything.
Yeah. I'm also curious, how many days of food are you carrying at one time?
Typically in Sweden, it was about 5 days at a time, and sometimes more, sometimes less. But in Norway, I think it's going to be a little different, but I think 6 to 7 days to start with. And the further north I go, the less time it's going to take me to get from a resupply point to another, even if it's a longer distance. So I think it's going to be around that 5 to 6 day mark.
Yeah. Are you doing this solo?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's me myself. Yeah, just me and my tent and my skis. Nobody else.
Same. You're going to use kind of the same sleep system and shelter system.
Similar. I actually did find that my sleeping bag was not as warm in the end of the hike as I would have liked it to be, because there's like, if you lose some weight, you're gonna feel colder. So that's gonna be one thing. Then the sleeping bag, it's also going to get dirty after like a month or two. So that's going to add up to it. And then when with the skiing with the backpack, you always have it crammed into the compression sack. It's gonna also like lose the loft even more because of that. So I added, I think it was about 100 Yeah, I added some down to the sleeping bag. I went with a different. It's pretty much the same bag from Cumulus, but I went with the Tenega 1000 instead of the 850 I had before. So it's just a warmer bag. And the tent I'm going to use, it's similar. It's also a pyramid tent, but it's from a Ukrainian company called Lightway. It's almost the same size, but it's just a bit of a different build that I want to try. So they also made me a solid inner for that. So it's nicer now.
Yeah. And you mentioned this earlier to me, but the size of your tent plays a big part in your fuel efficiency and your moisture management.
Yeah, how big of a tent are you using?
So it's a 2-person pyramid. It's not the smallest they make. It's like a mid-size pyramid. I would compare it to a Ultimate 2 if you have experience with that. It's similar size. So I used the half inner all this time as well, and then an extern pad on the bottom. So I used the old version because it's not as thick as the new version. So with the walls caving in on the pyramid tent, you kind of want to be a bit lower inside there.
Yeah.
But it's sufficient for one in the winter.
Yeah. So what makes you want to do this, right? I mean, this seems like a bit of a lonely hike, right? Compared to like the PCT or hiking, you're seeing people every day, I'm sure. And there's something also about this like snow hiking and skiing that it's very quiet. The snow makes everything very quiet. And then you're a lot of time in your tent at night. So it's a very solo experience. But I'd love to hear what draws you to these kinds of adventures. And I mean, yeah, what are you most looking forward to? What are you getting out of this?
So hiking or skiing in the winter, it's just everything looks so much nicer when it's covered in snow. That's just the main thing. It's so pretty, and there's so many reasons to love winter as well. You can like choose your route anywhere. You don't have limits, only like if you get to a too steep of an angle. But it's like you can just take advantage of lakes. You can ski through the lakes and on the ice, and you can like ski through the rain that in the summertime would just be inaccessible sometimes. You can get to places where you couldn't get to very easily in the summer. So it also adds to the loneliness of the experience in a sense, of course, but it's one part why I love doing these things. You get to be just immersed in the nature that there's like nothing around you, and you get to like you tune in to the sounds of everything, because the sounds are a little different in the snow. They don't really, there's so few animals, for example, that live up there, so it's every time it's a joy when you see something. But it does bring those surprises to you when you have a bird just flying, like they burrow themselves in the snow and then they just hide there, and if you get too close they kind of give their sound and they surprise you and you get scared of them, and then you're like, oh, another one of those. Yeah, there's so many factors, but I love to kind of challenge myself in ways that I haven't done before. But now that I have this Sweden trip like behind me, I can with some certainty say that I can do like twice the length of that trip. So it gives me that extra length, like the duration of the trip challenge in the winter time, and distance, of course, as well. But then like all of these things with gear, just trying out things and like making it as good as I can. And this time I'm going with the waxable skis, so I kind of want to master the skill of backcountry grip waxing as well. There's so many things that I can learn on these trails that you just couldn't if you did short day trips every once in a while. It's gonna like give you the experience that nobody else has.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's something very compelling about these styles of trips, the experiences. I think there is something, I don't know, almost primal would be the way of saying it, to be like totally solo on your own. You know, every day is a life or death experience in all reality. It's you're not in forgivable conditions. And it's, there's something to that, right? It's a completely different challenge, but it's also extremely fascinating in its own way. So I'm excited for you. I'm rooting for you to crush this and have it go well for you. And I'm sure you'll have crazy challenges out there, but I think you've done a lot of preparation, and both in trips and in planning, and yeah, I'm excited for you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I feel the same way about some of your sentiments as to, you know, why you do these things that you do, and I mean it's pretty unique for sure. You know, we love winter backpacking, and I feel like, you know, between us we're frequently kind of like preaching, you know, for people to go get out in the wintertime. There's a British guy that I heard him say he's like an explorer, and he said, you know, like if you don't get out in winter, well, that's one of the 4 seasons, and you're missing out on 25% of your life. You know, if you don't get out, and so and to do it in the way that you do it it's fascinating, and it just sounds invigorating, and I can definitely appreciate that.
I think, yeah, I mean, it's, and unless you push yourself, like you're pushing yourself, which you kind of touched on as well, there's lessons you'll never learn, right? There's things that you'll never be able to learn. And to me, that's part of that is rounding out your experience and knowledge base. And, but yeah, I don't know. I think that there's something about, you know, applying yourself in this way too, that you're building a knowledge set and experience in a category that many people aren't. And there's a lot of value in that too. Well,
there's a lot to learn to go from going out in the winter. And
great learning opportunity.
Yeah.
Well, we really appreciate you coming on here and sharing these experiences and just sharing the knowledge that you've built. Definitely looking forward to your next adventure as well. And you know, maybe we'll be able to bring you back on and hear how that adventure goes. But is there anything that we didn't touch on that you'd like to call out at this point? Whether that's just experiences or whether that's gear related, anything at all that we missed?
I'm sure we missed a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot there's a ton. I mean, yeah, I think you could go on for hours upon hours getting into all the details and, you know, letting you share, you know, all the lessons learned that you've had over the years and the many days and nights you've spent out there. So it's definitely fascinating.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah,
oh, go ahead.
Yeah, it's hard to fit like everything in 1 hour. So it's hard to like, because it's so much about all of that nuance into these things. Like you want to give the bigger picture of how it generally is, but then also get into the details of it, which makes up to all of that. So it's
yeah. Well, hopefully we'll be able to sync with you again and get into some of those more finer details. We've set the framework of what you do now on these big trips. But yeah, I mean, I'll I'm always fascinated to hear, intricacies of how you're layering or how you're doing certain actions that sometimes can feel second nature or get glossed over. But the reality is, there's a lot of people out there that would be incredibly valuable and new information for them. So yeah, I mean, definitely looking forward to that. Do you share any of your journeys online, or is there places where people can follow along with your journey?
Yeah, so in English, I post on my Instagram. It's Teemu of Trail, my first name of Trail. And then I'm actually, it's going to be in Finnish, but I'm launching my own website as we turn to 2024, because I found it a little odd that about winter hiking, there's not really too much information even in Finnish online. Like I can find more information on skis from like a North American forum somewhere. Like it's so weird. I just needed to kind of fill that void and also do like series from the trail to kind of show people that, hey, this is possible and this is actually accessible to you. It's not like a polar expedition where you will spend like 200 grand just to get there. So I think it's valuable to share what I do.
Yeah. We want to help share your website. So, I mean, if you provide us that, we definitely want to steer people that direction and encourage them to follow you on Instagram as well. I mean, it's just fascinating. We really hope we can kind of get a trip report, when you're done with all this. And then taking a little bit different direction, I want to say a bit selfishly on my side, it's been fun to get to know you and have this conversation. So, I have this little bit of a fascination with, things from Scandinavia or Finland. And so my dad lived in Finland for a couple of years, way before I was born. And so the timeliness is great because it's Christmas time here. And one of our family traditions is we always make pula and rice pudding. That's part of our Christmas tradition. And so, from what I understand, pula just means bread. Is that correct?
It's like sweet bun.
Okay, yeah, that's one of our Christmas treats. Is we braid. Well, I don't braid it, but my mother did, and my wife does now. She braids the pula bread, and I make the rice pudding, and so it's been fun to make this connection and. Yeah, we're grateful that we got to get you on here.
Well, we'll go ahead and let you go for today. Again, encourage people to go follow you. Definitely excited for your upcoming journey. Glad that you were able to come back and finish that PCT journey as well. And just thanks again for coming on and sharing all this information for our listeners.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Awesome. We'll go ahead. I was going to say, we'll go ahead and just cut it right there. But really appreciate it. Is there anything else that you'd need from us or that we can help you out with at this point? I mean, we're usually for podcast guests, we'll send you out a piece of gear or something like that. So if there's anything else that you're needing for your kit, just let us know and we can try to get something over to you.
Yeah, I'll let you know. Brigham he already sent me the Tushar rain jacket, which I was missing. I destroyed mine on the PCT. And
did that arrive yet?
Yeah, and also wind layer And then for my cold feet, I don't remember what they're called, but the warm booties. Yeah,
right.
the booties.
I'm
And
hoping
also
those
to
do the
try-
trick for you. It's not fun to sleep with cold feet every night.
Yeah, they will definitely do the trick. And also the Highline thermal layer,
yes.
like the leggings that you have been hyping up.
Mm-hmm.
I actually listened to the podcast a while back when it aired. They sound really good, and they might fit into like a extreme cold end of my my kit as a third layer. So I'm excited to see how they perform as I receive them and get to do some testing. I'm actually on my way up north, relocating to where my partner lives in Rovaniemi, and I'll be there for the next month, just trying out the rest of my gear. So thanks for helping me out with with my needs.
Yeah, definitely share feedback on all the pieces. The interesting thing about the rain jacket is there's new, I guess, regulations with like PFCs and PFAS, and C0 and C6, and so the rain jacket as it is now, that is going to be a thing of the past. We're basically forced to change, the membrane technology. So, it'll be good to get your feedback on that. All the pieces, your feedback's going to be good and helpful. But with the rain jacket, we're actively kind of sourcing out new materials because we're basically going to have to be changing that piece.
Yeah, I'll let you know how everything goes and how everything works. I think it's going to add up to a great kit and make my long journey more enjoyable.
Hope so.
For sure. Okay. Well, we'll go ahead and let you go. Thanks again, Teemu, for coming on, and we'll be in touch.
Yeah.
All right. Take care.
Right. Yeah. Take care as well. Thank you for having me on.
All right. I hope you guys enjoyed that conversation with Teemu. Definitely a lot of lessons to be learned, and super fascinating world that he lives in, and in those specific kind of adventures. So wish him the best of luck as he heads out on trail again soon. And hopefully we'll bring him back on the podcast and hear how everything went, and additional lessons and finer details. These are things that we love to share because we are definitely of the opinion that winter backpacking or ski trips or snowshoe trips can be a ton of fun and a completely different experience that is still extremely enjoyable. And we always are trying to encourage many of you guys to go give it a shot for yourself. I think you'll find a lot of enjoyment out of it. And if you're someone who's been backpacking in the summer or shoulder seasons, you'll learn that a lot of that does carry over into the winter, but you'll be pushed in some slightly different ways that just round out your skill set. So hopefully you guys, get inspired by listening to these, feel more confident by listening to these, and are willing to go give this stuff a shot for yourself. So. Okay, with that, we'll go ahead and wrap up this podcast. Please make sure to share this podcast, rank the podcast, give us a review, make sure you're subscribed, and we'll see you guys on the next one.